Motorcycles are supposed to be awesome, but some of them are so terrible, you'd be an idiot if you bought them. From design fails to even the manufacturers themselves being embarrassed, today, we're diving into 10 motorcycles you'd have to be an idiot to buy. Number 1 is the most shameful purchase anyone could ever make. Let's kick things off with the Suzuki GSX 250R, a bike that screams, "I'm a sport bike." But in truth, it's actually a moped in disguise. This is the motorcycle equivalent of a chihuahua wearing a spiked collar, trying desperately to look tough while being fundamentally unthreatening. Powered by a wheezy 248cc parallel twin engine that produces a yawn-inducing 25 horsepower, this bike struggles to outrun a determined cyclist on a hill. Yet every year, thousands of wannabe racers slap on aftermarket exhausts, flashy graphics, and frame sliders, convinced they're one mod away from MotoGP glory. The problem here isn't about the bike itself. It's actually a decent beginner motorcycle. The problem is the people who buy it thinking they're getting a mini Hayabusa. These misguided souls spend thousands customizing their GSX 250Rs, often investing more in modifications than the bike is worth. They'll add power commanders, air filters, and race fairings to a bike that gets about 65 miles per gallon, but couldn't pull the skin off a rice pudding. It's like putting a spoiler on a golf cart. It doesn't make it faster, it just makes you look silly. The saddest part? Many of these over-modified GSX 250Rs barely get ridden. Their owners quickly realize that no amount of carbon fiber can transform their beginner bike into a GSX R1000. So, the bike sits in the garage, a monument to misplaced enthusiasm, sounding like an angry hairdryer when it does run. It's a great beginner bike. You can learn how to ride without dying, and that's honestly very rare for a sports bike. But if you're purchasing one thinking you'll transform it into a track weapon, you might as well set your money on fire. At least that would provide some actual heat. But if you think a lightweight beginner bike with delusions of grandeur is bad, wait until you see what happens when a cruiser manufacturer tries to build a sport bike. Our next entry is what happens when your grandpa tries to become one of today's youth. The Harley-Davidson V-Rod is what occurs when a company known for making agricultural equipment with wheels decides to build a performance motorcycle. It's the motorcycle equivalent of your 50-year-old uncle wearing skinny jeans and a backwards cap to connect with the youth. Powered by a Porsche-designed 1130cc Revolution Vive twin engine producing 115 to 125 horsepower, the V-Rod was Harley's attempt to attract younger riders who wanted something that could actually take a corner without scraping the entire undercarriage. The thing is, V-Rod tries to be everything to everyone and ends up being nothing to anyone. A 640-pound behemoth that's too sporty for traditional Harley riders and too heavy for sport bike enthusiasts. Despite its relatively impressive engine, the V-Rod gets a dismal 37 miles per gallon and handles like a shopping cart with a flat wheel. The riding position is a bizarre compromise that leaves you neither comfortable nor in control, with forward controls that make precise handling about as likely as finding affordable healthcare. And let's talk about that radiator. A sacrilegious addition to a Harley that sticks out like a sore thumb. Traditional Harley riders rejected it for not being authentic, while performance riders laughed at its weight and handling. The V-Rod is the perfect bike for someone who wants to tell everyone they ride a Harley, but secretly wishes they bought a Ducati. It's a $17,000 identity crisis on wheels. But if you think the V-Rod is an expensive mistake, our next entry proves that even toy motorcycles can cost real motorcycle money. Prepare to meet the world's most overpriced embarrassment. Rolling in at number 8, we have the Indian EFTR Junior, a bike that proves you can indeed pay too much for a toy. Nothing says I make poor financial decisions quite like spending $950 on an electric dirt bike designed for children but marketed to adults with more money than sense. The Indian EFTR Junior is a miniature electric replica of Indian's FTR 1200 flat track racer. With a top speed of 15 miles per hour and a battery range of about 140 minutes in low mode, this isn't a motorcycle. It's an expensive toy that adults use to pretend they're riding a real bike. It's marketed as a serious piece of equipment when it's really just a glorified toy, powered by a pathetic electric motor that produces the equivalent of about 3 horsepower. This 175-pound motorcycle is what happens when marketing departments are allowed to run wild. It's the motorcycle equivalent of those plastic kitchens adults buy for children, except you're the child and you paid for it yourself. The EFTR Junior doesn't even qualify for MPG ratings because it's not a real vehicle. It's a backyard plaything masquerading as a motorcycle, complete with a price tag that could get you a decent used actual motorcycle. If you're an adult riding this around your property, you're not a motorcyclist. You're a grown person on a children's toy. The only thing more embarrassing than being seen on one is having to explain to your friends why you bought it. But if you think a toy pretending to be a motorcycle is ridiculous, wait until you see what happens when a scooter tries to cosplay as a cruiser. Sliding into number 7, we have the Kawasaki Eliminator 125, a bike that tries to be a cruiser but ends up being a scooter with delusions of grandeur. Powered by a microscopic 124cc single-cylinder engine that produces a laughable 12 horsepower, the Eliminator is neither eliminating nor impressive. It struggles to reach 65 miles per hour downhill with a tailwind, yet somehow Kawasaki had the audacity to style it like a cruiser. It tries to look like a big, bad cruiser, but has the heart of a lawnmower. Despite its excellent 70 miles per gallon fuel economy, this 290-pound cruiser is the motorcycle equivalent of a chihuahua wearing a spiked collar, trying desperately to look tough while being fundamentally unthreatening. The Eliminator 125 is a bike for people who want to look like they ride a Harley but have the budget and courage of someone who should stick to bicycles. The seat height is low enough for almost anyone, which is convenient because that's about the only demographic this bike appeals to, anyone who doesn't know better. The suspension is so basic, it makes a pogo stick look sophisticated, and the brakes require the planning and foresight usually reserved for space missions. If you're over 160 pounds, congratulations, you've just become the most powerful component on the motorcycle. Kawasaki mercifully discontinued this model, yet somehow they still occasionally appear for sale, usually by owners who finally realized that cruiser styling doesn't actually make a 125cc bike cool. But if you think an underpowered fake cruiser is confusing, our next entry will leave you scratching your head until you reach bone. This bike doesn't just have an identity crisis, it has a full-blown identity breakdown. At number 6, we have the Honda CTX 700, a bike that can't decide what it wants to be when it grows up. Is it a cruiser? Is it a sport bike? Is it a touring bike? Honda's answer was yes to all of those. And the result was a bike that failed spectacularly at being any of those things. Powered by a 670cc parallel twin engine that produces a thoroughly underwhelming 48 horsepower, the CTX 700 is a motorcycle designed by committee. It has the seating position of a cruiser, the fairing of a sport tourer, and the excitement level of a dishwasher. The criticism here is that it tries to be everything and ends up being nothing. The riding experience is equally baffling. The feet-forward position suggests cruiser, but the relatively high handlebars say touring bike, resulting in a riding position that seems specifically designed to make chiropractors wealthy. And despite its substantial size, the CTX 700 offers minimal storage space, poor passenger accommodations, and handling that can best be described as reluctant. At 500 pounds wet, it's too heavy for its power output, making its 60 miles per gallon fuel economy the only thing worth mentioning. But the real head-scratcher is the optional DCT automatic transmission that Honda grandly marketed as revolutionary. There's nothing revolutionary about paying motorcycle prices for scooter performance. The CTX 700 is the perfect bike for someone who doesn't actually want a motorcycle, but feels obligated to own one. It's the motorcycle equivalent of sensible beige slacks, technically functional, but devoid of any personality or joy. But if you think Honda's identity crisis is bad, wait until you see what happens when a Korean manufacturer tries to copy Japanese sport bikes without understanding what makes them good. Our next bike is the motorcycle equivalent of a knockoff designer handbag. Halfway through our list, we have the Hyosung GT 250R, a bike that proves imitation is not always the sincerest form of flattery. This is what happens when a company looks at Japanese sport bikes and thinks, we can make that, but worse in every way. Powered by a 249cc V-twin engine that somehow manages to produce only 28 horsepower despite having twice the cylinders of its Japanese competitors, the GT250R is a masterclass in disappointment. It weighs a porky 375 pounds wet, making its power-to-weight ratio similar to that of an asthmatic hamster. The criticism here is that it tries to look like a sports bike, but performs like a scooter. Despite getting a reasonable 65 miles per gallon, the Hyosung is the motorcycle equivalent of those knockoff designer sunglasses you buy from a street vendor. It looks vaguely like the real thing until you actually use it. The fit and finish would make Fisher-Price blush, with plastics that seem designed to crack if you look at them too intensely. The electrical system appears to have been designed by someone whose understanding of electricity came from rubbing balloons on their hair. Owners report mysterious electrical gremlins that would baffle even the most experienced mechanics. And let's talk about resale value, or rather, the complete lack thereof. Buy a GT250R new, and by the time you ride it home, it's already depreciated more than a banana left in the sun. Parts availability? Hope you enjoy waiting weeks for shipping from Korea, assuming the parts are even still made. The GT250R is the perfect bike for someone who wants to look like they ride a sports bike, but doesn't want any of the reliability, performance, or respect that comes with owning a Japanese or European machine. But if you think a Korean knockoff is embarrassing, wait until you see what happens when an American icon tries to build an entry-level bike by cutting every corner possible. Our next bike is so bad, even its creator publicly destroyed one. Coming in at number 4, we have the Buell Blast, a bike that proves even the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes. This is what happens when Harley-Davidson tries to build an entry-level motorcycle and fails spectacularly. Powered by a single-cylinder 492cc engine that produces a pathetic 34 horsepower, the Blast was supposed to be Harley's gateway drug to get new riders hooked on the brand. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about what happens when you cut too many corners. It tries to be a Harley, but ends up being a headache. Despite its relatively good 65 miles per gallon fuel economy, this 360-pound monstrosity handles like it's allergic to corners. The suspension seems to be made of recycled pogo sticks, and the brakes require the kind of forward planning usually reserved for retirement savings. The Blast's plastic body panels crack if you look at them wrong, and the engine vibrates so violently at certain RPMs that owners report losing fillings. It's like riding a paint mixer that occasionally decides to transport you from one place to another. Eric Buell himself was so embarrassed by this bike that he literally crushed one in a promotional video for his next company. When the creator of your motorcycle publicly destroys one to make a point, perhaps it's time to reconsider your purchase. The Buell Blast is the perfect bike for someone who wants the Harley-Davidson experience of constant maintenance and disappointment, but doesn't have the budget for a full-size Harley. But if you think 2 wheels of disappointment is bad, wait until you see what happens when they add a 3rd wheel to the mix. Our next entry proves that sometimes more isn't better. It's just more expensive and more ridiculous. Rolling into the top 3, we have the Can-Am Spyder, a vehicle that proves 3 wheels are not always better than 2. This is what happens when someone looks at a motorcycle and thinks, this would be better if it was more like a snowmobile with wheels. Powered by a Rotax 998 CEE V-twin engine, in most models that produces around 100 horsepower, the Spyder isn't a motorcycle. It's a 1,000-pound identity crisis. It has 3 wheels, a car-like seat, and the handling characteristics of a shopping cart with a wonky wheel. Offering the thrill of motorcycling without any of the actual thrill, despite getting only about 35 miles per gallon, the Spyder costs as much as a decent car, starting at around $17,000 and going up to $27,000 for models that come with more unnecessary gadgets than a Sky Mall catalog. The Spyder removes everything that makes motorcycling enjoyable: the lean, the connection to the road, the sense of freedom, and replaces it with a bloated, overcomplicated machine that handles like a drunk rhinoceros. It doesn't lean into corners, it plows through them with all the grace of a bulldozer. The Spider is the perfect vehicle for someone who wants to tell everyone they ride a motorcycle, but is terrified of actually riding one. It's the motorcycle equivalent of those swimming pools with the plastic lane dividers. Technically, you're in the water, but no one's impressed by your bravery. But if you think a three-wheeled monstrosity is the height of motorcycle confusion, wait until you see what happens when an iconic American brand tries to go green overnight. Our next bike proves that even the most established manufacturers can completely miss the mark. At number 2, we have the Harley-Davidson Livewire, a bike that proves even the most iconic brands can miss the mark. This is what happens when a company known for making loud, inefficient cruisers tries to go green overnight. Powered by a battery that produces 105 horsepower and 86 foot-pounds of torque, the Livewire could have been revolutionary. Instead, it's a $30,000 monument to missed opportunities. The criticism here is that it tries to be a Harley for the modern age, but ends up being a very expensive experiment. This 550-pound electric motorcycle offers a paltry 146-mile range in the city and much less on the highway, making it impractical for the long rides Harley owners typically enjoy. It's the equivalent of buying a boat that's afraid of water. The Livewire is a Harley that doesn't sound like a Harley, doesn't look like a Harley, and doesn't ride like a Harley. It's an identity crisis with handlebars, marketed to environmentally conscious riders who somehow have $30,000 to spend on a motorcycle, but not enough sense to buy one that can actually go the distance. And let's talk about charging. Hope you enjoy spending 40 minutes at a DC fast charger or an entire night on a standard outlet. Nothing says freedom of the open road quite like planning your route around charging stations and bringing a good book for the waits. The Livewire is the perfect bike for someone who wants to tell their friends they care about the environment, but doesn't actually need to go anywhere. But if you think an overpriced electric Harley is the pinnacle of motorcycle madness, prepare yourself for our number 1 spot. This final bike proves that sometimes having too much of everything creates the perfect storm of motorcycle stupidity. And finally, at number 1, we have the Suzuki B-King, the motorcycle equivalent of bringing a nuclear weapon to a knife fight and still somehow losing. The B-King started life as a concept bike featuring the engine from the Hayabusa, the world's fastest production motorcycle. By the time it reached production in 2007, it had transformed into a 1,340cc naked bike that produced 181 horsepower and weighed a staggering 518 pounds wet. Was built to be a superbike for the street, but ends up being a heavy, unwieldy beast. This monstrosity gets a dismal 30 miles per gallon and features exhaust pipes the size of industrial drainage systems. The styling can best be described as what would happen if a transformer had indigestion, all bulges and unnecessary plastic in places where no plastic should be. Despite its impressive power, the B-King handles like a supertanker thanks to its weight and bizarre weight distribution. It's too powerful for the street, too heavy for the track, and too ugly for photographs. It's a bike without a purpose, a solution to a problem no one had. The B-King was so poorly received that Suzuki discontinued it after just 3 years, making it one of the shortest production runs for a flagship model from a major manufacturer. Today, they occasionally appear for sale, usually by owners who finally realized that having the biggest engine doesn't actually translate to having the most fun. The B-King is the perfect bike for someone who wants to tell everyone how fast their motorcycle is, while secretly being terrified to use more than 20% of the throttle. It's the motorcycle equivalent of buying a supercomputer to check your email. Impressive on paper, ridiculous in practice. Want to see more kinds of these videos? Click the video on your screen now. Thanks for watching.